Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ash here coming at you today in Raid Shadow Legends. Today is going to be a really good video because we're going to talk about the teams that I used in every single faction to clear level 21 faction wars. We're also going to focus on a few of my favorite epic champions for you guys to consider investing in if you have it somewhere on your radar of clearing every level 21 dungeon, 3-starring I should say, every level 21 dungeon as well. These are above and beyond just faction wars. These are great epic champions to invest in for Doom Tower, I'm sure, as well, and for dungeon progression, basically progression anywhere that you need it to keep your team alive, right? So a lot of support champions in today's video, and of course, when the going gets tough, not the tough get going, the attackers get going. Usually, you're going to want a team with maybe 1 or 2 damage dealers, and the rest is going to be all about supporting your team and keeping everybody alive enough to get to the boss and to begin with. So today, I'm going to show you again the teams that I used in each of these factions, but I'm also going to focus on a couple of my favorite epics as well. So let's start with the most difficult faction and get that over with because it's tough, man. Look at this. I mean, we got 9 legendary and epic champions in Dwarves. So Dwarves was my last faction crypt that I ended up 3-starring, actually it wasn't my last, second to last, but it was right there. The day before I cleared Demon Spawn, I cleared Dwarves. And I actually did it with Mountain King, with Molly, with Jarl, with Rearguard Sergeant, and with Rockbreaker. So I used 3 epics and 2 legendaries. I had Mountain King in a shield set. And let's talk about these epics, man. So, because basically 4 out of the 5 of these epics are going to help you a lot in faction wars. If you don't have Mountain King, you can use the same team with Gala Longbraids. However, I am not aware. I think there's only one team you can make that is no legendary for Dwarves, right? And that team would be 2 Rearguard Sergeants, 1 Grizzled Jarl, Rockbreaker, and Gala Longbraids. So good luck. It's so difficult, right? I mean, they need to add another dwarf legendary or epic that's accessible, right? Like a fusion that's a really good dwarf champion, because look at this, man, come on, Plarium, add some more dwarfs, dude. I mean, we got enough rare dwarves. Anyway, Jarl is probably one of the most important champions to have because he has block debuffs, increased defense on a 3-turn, and then he has Earth Stomp, which actually does good damage. His damage is based off of defense, and he has a decreased attack on there as well. So really nice to have the 100% decreased attack when booked on Earth Stomp mixed with the increased defense and the block debuffs. So important to have on your team. Rearguard Sergeant's also important because of her A3, where she has Ally Protect and Continuous Heal on a 3-turn cooldown. If you have 2 of these champions, they can kind of split the damage. She also has decreased attack on her A2 and a decreased defense on her A1. Her damage is also based on defense. And then for me, you guys probably already know, but Rockbreaker was the dude who actually got me through Dwarf. Like, I was trying with Trunda, I was trying with Mountain King and Molly and just struggling, right? But Rockbreaker was the guy who finally I built with really high defense, the lowest HP on my team so he could tank and be targeted by the boss. And then the red boss, every time she would hit him, it took me like 4 or 5 tries to get the RNG, but I would need this to proc. It's a 50% chance of decreasing the damage inflicted on this champion by 50% each time he's attacked. Really helpful, right? He's going to be attacked every time, and then he'll, as long as this triggers the Ironhide, and it's a coin flip, 50-50 shot, you're going to be good, and you'll be able to stay alive. But again, it's RNG based, so you have to run that team a few times oftentimes before you get that victory. Also has a Provoke on Chest Thump on a 3-turn cooldown, an AoE Provoke. Really nice to have. And he has an increased defense on his A1. It stacks up to 20% increased defense. So Rockbreaker for me was a huge, huge game changer. Let's, again, just for sake of brevity here, let's move on to the next faction. Knight Revenant, the team that I used was Worldlord Frost King. I didn't have Narma at the time. Miscreated Monster, Senesha, Doom Priest, and Skullcrown. So, I mean, I just covered a lot of the best champs, so obviously Miscreated Monster is one of the best champions in the game, let alone for faction wars, and Miscreated Monster, he has, the AoE shield, the AoE stun, the ally protect, the continuous heal on himself, and the stun on the A1. Also places a fear whenever an ally is attacked when they're under his ally protect. So very, very instrumental to have on your team. And then I have the tandem of Senesha and Skullcrown, which is nice because Senesha has an AoE on her A1, as does Skullcrown, and then she has this Immortality, which is really the best heal I had on the team, right? So having Senesha built out and she was the last addition to this team for me, was again a huge game changer. Immortality was a huge heal, and then these Vaporize heals were also incredibly clutch in order to keep the team alive. One note is I had Senesha in Skullcrown, both in stun sets, okay? That really helped me on the waves because it's challenging in Night Revenant on those waves, even with Miscreated Monster having 3 champions who could lay down stuns against Senesha, Skullcrown, AoE, 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 and Miscreated Monster helped me out tremendously, especially on that second wave. So she's placing 2 hits on her A1. If the target has more than 50% HP, again, 2 chances at a stun. And then on the A2, obviously, you guys know she has the Weaken and a pretty hard-hitting Corrupting Touch ability. And then Doom Priest was there just for support, really. It has a 7.5% heal every single time she takes a turn, and also removes 1 random debuff from all allies at the start of her turns. So again, very important to have Doom Priest on the team as well. The rest of her kit is kind of whatever, but the passive, is all you need from Doom Priest. She's a really, really, really solid and underrated champion. Let's see. Anything else I want to talk about here? I guess Sepulture Sentinel would be a great option. She's one of the only epics in the game I don't have, as you guys could see. She has a decreased attack on her A1. She has increased defense and block debuffs on her A2 on a 4 turn. And then she has a 25% chance to make it 50 when booked of completely blocking incoming damage when an ally is protect. If it's an AoE, it only actually affects 1 ally. Just something to note there. But yeah, a really, really, really good champion. Also has defense in all battles by 25% on that aura. As it was, I think I had to use Senesha's. Yeah, HP and faction crits by 31% actually wasn't that bad to use. So that was the team that I ran. Let's go on to Dark Elves. Wow. Now we're talking. Some more options here. I could have beat Dark Elves with quite a few different combinations, so I actually honestly forgot at which team I first won with, but I will tell you that Madame Ceres was on the team, and there's just so many good options in terms of Dark Elves, actually, and now that I look, right? You could even use, I think I even used Painkeeper, who's a rare champion. So I used Painkeeper on my team, Combat Tactics, resets the cooldown. That helps a lot, or decreases the cooldown of all ally skills by 1 turn on a 4 turn when booked. That helps a lot over the duration of an entire Faction War battle. Also has the nice heal on her A2, and I put her in a shield set. So she was really important to my team. I can't discredit that. I also ran a Cold Heart, so I actually ran 2 rares on my team. Cold Heart really nice with the turn meter depletion. And then in terms of epics, we ran a Ceres as well. So that's 3 non-legendary characters. I was looking at the legendaries at first. I'm like, I don't think I ran like barely any of these guys. And as a matter of fact, I really didn't. I didn't have these last 3. Actually, I did have Blind Seer. So I ran Blind Seer for support, and I think I ran like Foley or somebody for nukage. However, getting to the point of today's video, right? 3 really, really good support champions that you guys can choose from. Really 4 great accessible support champions. 3 epics and 1 legendary. Captain Tamila on her A1 has a continuous heal on this champion for 1 turn. Not bad to have a self-heal, the big version on the A1. On the A2, really useful on a 3-turn cooldown, increased defense all allies for 2 turns, and heals all allies by 15% of this champion's max HP. Stay in the Fight is actually a really, really underrated and amazing ability in the game. And then Ally Protect buff on all allies except this champion for 2 turns on a 4-turn on Exalted Guardian. I gotta say, Captain Tamila is really, really solid for Faction Wars and for progression. Caden, the same deal. He has an AoE decrease attack on his A2, and he has the Revival. Revive 2 random allies with 50% HP and increased defense on a 4-turn in favor of the Chamber. A new epic champion who I'm sure a lot of you guys are investing in. Definitely going to help you out tremendously in Faction Wars. And Crimson Helm is the last one that I want to touch on in the epic category. Man, she's a beast as well. Has a decreased attack on the A1. On the A2 has a 4-time, but each hit has a 95% chance at placing a provoke. Add sniper, you're looking at mastery, you're looking at 100% provoke, and then place block damage buff on this champion for 1 turn. On the A3, a revive on death and an increased defense buff on all allies 2 turns on a 4-turn cooldown on Unguard. So that is her kit, man. I mean, and look at that high base defense at 1531, man. Really, really solid champion in Crimson Helm. And I will throw a bone to Visix the Unbowed, who is a daily login reward champion. She's taken a lot of heat as being one of the worst legendaries out there. You can see that people don't think very highly of her. However, I actually think she's pretty solid for Faction Wars, considering she's free. So on the A1, she has some turn meter stuff going on. On the A2, an AoE with a decreased speed. Place a shield buff on this champion, 20% of their max HP for 2 turns on a 3-turn cooldown. Not bad. And then on the A3, place a provoke debuff on a target for 1 turn. Also place an ally protect on all allies except this champion for 2 turns on a 3-turn cooldown. So again, not a... And the aura, I should say, by the way, defense and faction crypts by 37%. That's an aura you can run as an aura lead. So Physics the Unbowed, although you may scoff at her overall as a legendary champion, she's definitely a champion you can get tons of value from in Faction Wars. So definitely don't sleep on her in that regard. Undead Horror, guys, I use an OP legendary team for the most part with Bad L, Nethril, Siffy, and probably Mausoleum Mage. And I don't know who I use for damage dealer, but it doesn't really matter. So you have a lot of options here as well, guys. Obviously, Gorgorab's going to be number 1, you know, assuming you don't have one of the OP legendary champions in Undead Horde. But he has the Revival, right? And champions that have Revival in their kit are just golden in terms of 3-starring in Faction Wars, because you can kind of cheese it. At the end of the Faction War, you can cycle A1s and then have a Reviver, assuming your Reviver is alive, just revive the rest of the team. So Gorgrab should definitely not be overlooked in that regard. He also has turn meter fill, increased attack on his A2, nice to have, and then a chance at removing 1 random buff from the target on his A1. So Gorgrab definitely the first kind of nod in terms of a great champion here, but there's a few more too. Seeker, amazing, right? I mean, we talked so much about Seeker here on the channel. I have an updated video on Seeker as well about a month or 2 ago, really talking about just how amazing this champion is. Turn meter boost with the extra turn and increased attack on his A2 on a 3-turn cooldown, a provoke on his A1, and his passive, really helpful for Faction Wars. Heals his champion by 20% and places a 60% increased defense on all allies for 2 turns when he's hit with a critical hit. That's a 5-turn cooldown passive. Very, very good to have a Seeker on your team as well. And although there's a few champions here who could be usable and serviceable, you have to mention Mausoleum Mage, because he has the block debuffs, increased crit rate, and increased defense on all allies on a 3-turn cooldown with the cleanse on Winds of Purging on a 4-turn cooldown. Removes all debuffs from all allies, then heals them by 10% of his max HP. Very, very solid champion. A lot of people put him in a shield set as well. Shield sets do kind of give diminishing returns in Faction Wars because they're such long battles and you only have them for 3 turns, but they can be helpful if your champions are low HP heading into a round, give you a little bit of time for your healers to kind of catch up to the battle. Demon Spawn. The team that I used was Prince Kymar, Mortu Macabre, Inferno Baroness, Tanix Hateflower, and Umbral Enchantress. So let's talk about those epics. Umbral Enchantress, probably the most important epic for Demon Spawn. And Demon Spawn, I told you, was my last Faction War cleared. I had a challenge in Demon Spawn, guys. It's no joke, man. Demon Spawn 21, if you don't have Duchess, right? I don't have Duchess, so that's why. So anyway, on the A3, Undying Evil, it has the AoE provoke for 2 turns and the unkillable on herself. And then she's out of the battle for 5 turns. But still, man, this is key, right? Key for those waves, definitely. And then has a block debuffs for 3 turns as well on the A2. So that's Umbral Enchantress. I mean, it's pretty simple what we're using her for, so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about her. But Tanix Hateflower is another champion who gets a lot of hate in general, but she was my biggest healer in Faction Wars 21. Yeah, that's how sad the state of healing is, especially if you don't have a Duchess in Demon Spawn, man. I really relied on Tanix a ton. So on the A1 has a heals all allies by 3% of this champion's max HP with each hit on targets under decreased speed. So it's 6% because it's 2 hits. 6%, and I built her out with a shield set with as much HP as I could throw on her. So at the end of the day, you know, she's healing basically every time she goes in with that A1, providing you have a target under decreased speed, which you pretty much always can in these long, drawn-out Faction War battles. She ended up doing a ton of healing for my team because every single time she goes, again, she only has 2 abilities. She only has the A1 in terms of active abilities, and the A2. It's an AoE on a 3-turn cooldown, attacks 1 enemy, has a 50% chance of placing a decreased speed that can be booked up to 100%, has to be booked, obviously, and then has a 100% chance of placing decreased speed debuff on all enemies for 2 turns instead, if the attack is critical. So an AoE decreased speed, and then boom, decreased speed in combination with that heal, and that really, really helped me out a lot in Tanix Hateflower. Not a great champion, but great in that specific role. Infernal Baroness, I put in a stun set to help me out on the second wave, and she's really solid too. She has an AoE attack on her A1, heals the ally with the lowest HP by 5% of the damage inflicted, which is helpful, especially in the first 2 waves, but not as helpful against the boss. Obviously, she's not putting out a ton of damage. Her multipliers are very low, even though they are based on defense, so don't expect a lot of damage off this Life Siphon. Ergo, don't expect a big heal out of this. And it's only 1 ally, not an AoE. If it was all allies by 5% of the damage inflicted, she'd be a beast. Clinging Dark, though, and this is why I invested in her as my support champion, my last champion that I built out specifically for this team, is because of the decreased attack. I didn't have a decreased attack champion in Demon Spawn, so I built her basically so I could have that sustainability by consistently having that decreased attack on the enemies. And then Perfect Veil on an ally for 3 turns is, not a great ability, but it's solid. It helps you out. If someone's really low on HP, put a Perfect Veil on them, and they're good for a few turns. Sometimes on auto, I would just, or not on auto, on manual, I just wouldn't use that ability if I didn't need it. One other champion that I do want to kind of throw a quick bone to is Nizana. Nizana is a really solid champion that I could have built out instead of Infernal Baroness, but I really wanted that AoE stun as well on her. But Nizana, actually, she has an AoE on the A1 too, so I take it all back. No decreased attack, though. So an AoE on the A1. On the A2, has an ally protect on all allies for 2 turns. Plays a shield buff on this champion for 2 turns. Value of the shield is 40% of her max HP. On the A3, another AoE. So I would actually... I don't know why I went with Infernal Baroness over Nizana. Maybe I didn't have Nizana. Maybe I had Infernal Baroness already at 50, like level 50 maxed or something. So Steel Breaker on a 3-turn cooldown with another AoE with a decreased attack, the same reason that we went with Infernal Baroness. I think she's probably the superior champion to go with. So I'm glad I actually went over her kit. She also has HP and faction crypts if you guys need an aura. So I'm glad I went over Nizana because I think a Nizana is actually probably a little bit preferable over Infernal Baroness. She actually has high HP too, so another option. And of course, Allure is great for turn mirror manipulation. I didn't end up going with Allure, but you certainly could go with Allure over, either of the legendaries I used, Kymar or Martu Macabre, if you don't have those champions. So let's go with, that was Demon Spawn. Okay, we have 8 more to go, and this video is already 20 minutes in. Crap! Let's go faster. Orcs. You guys know I've been talking pretty favorably about Grohawk the Bloody. A lot of people say he's the worst legendary in the game, but I'll tell you what, Lord of War was so useful for me to be able to beat the red boss. So Grohawk was the only, actually Kreela and Grohawk were the 2 legendaries I used on this team, and then I used Blind Seer Seer, is one of the most important epic champions for Orcs 21. Because of her Karma Burn, not because of all the damage that she's dealing necessarily, although that helps, but because she's removing all the buffs from all enemies, right? So having that buff removal every 4 turns is really, really helpful because, the waves can be super challenging in Orcs 21. I also went with Vrask as my healer, and I think I went with Tuok as my damage dealer. I don't know, at least I do now, right? But I could have went with Sandlash Survivor as well. She's really good, but you have to be careful because the boss puts out a lot of damage, and her ally protection can kill her, It puts out so much damage on an AoE that it can also kill her. She does have a block damage buff on this champion for 1 turn as well, but you have to be careful because she's 1 turn vulnerable, as well. So Sandlash Survivor, though, an incredibly good support champion to consider. Vrask is just an incredibly consistent healer for you. I had him in a Relentless set as well. And then, I think that's Zargala you can use as a debuffer, obviously, on her A3 Crack Armor. And then who else is really... Yeah, I guess that's kind of it in terms of, provided you don't have one of the OP legendaries. There's not that many. Kreela was really, really helpful for me as well. Kreela is super, super underrated. I would say she's, you know, borderline top 10 champion in the game, or legendary champion in the game. But yeah, I think those are your main options here. Let me know if I'm sleeping on anybody in Orcs, but that's kind of the team that I used. In Skinwalkers, a little bit more challenging. I have these 3 legendaries who I used, right? But even with those 3 legendaries, I still had to kind of invest a lot around them. I went with these 3 legendaries, and then the other 2 champions I used was Ursine Ironhide and Steel Skull. Steel Skull, I know some people who just run like 3 Steel Skulls in Skinwalkers 21, because Steel Skull is one of the most important support champions you can have. He has the increased defense for 2 turns, heals as well on that same ability on a 4-turn cooldown, and then he has the full cleanse and the heal on the A2 on a 3-turn cooldown. Removes all debuffs from the target ally, then heals them by 40%. Very, very useful. And then has the poison on the A1. Defense and faction crypts by 27%. Again, that aura can be useful, obviously, in faction crypts. A lot of people run him as aura lead. I believe I did as well. Ursine Ironhide. Actually, I'm glad I maxed this dude out because he's not flashy. He's not gonna, you know, he's not a crazy damage dealer or anything else. But he has an AoE attack that deals decent damage. He scales off of defense on a 4-turn cooldown with a decreased attack. Help me keep the team alive, essentially, right? And after that, he has some turn meter here on his beat back. He also decreases the turn meter a little bit extra if they're under a decreased attack. And on his A1, he has a 50% chance of increasing the cooldown of one of the skills by 1 turn. And then on his passive, each hit has a 100% chance when booked of decreasing the turn meter by 7.5%. So really, really nice to have him on the team, kind of rounding out the team. He's a champion. Again, I wasn't sure when I maxed him out what to think of him. Like, is this going to be a mistake? But he actually helped me out quite a bit. So Steel Skull and Basher is pretty solid. He has the increase the cooldown of all target skills by 2 turns. Good for the waves. Then on his A3, he has a block buffs, which is also good for the waves. So Basher, definitely a champion worth looking at there. And then one more champ is Flesh Terror. Flesh Terror is pretty good as well. On his A2, he has an AoE heal, and then increases the duration of all ally buffs by 1 turn. Really nice to have a buff extender on your team. And then on his Lay Low, it's an AoE attack that decreases the duration of all enemy buffs by 1 turn and increases the duration of all enemy debuffs by 1 turn. So you can see how Flesh Terror has a really nice synergy between extending our buffs and then, you know, decreasing the enemy's buffs and extending their debuffs. So a nice champion to kind of take a look at as well. So those are my favorites in Skinwalkers. In Lizardmen, another challenging faction to say the least. For me, I'm just going to be honest with you guys, I struggle. Lizardmen was one of my worst faction war crypts in the game. And then I got Krisk, and just having Krisk adding to a team, even with level 50 champions, I didn't even clear it with level 60 champions. He was able to essentially get me through the entire faction. That's how strong Krisk is. So if you don't have Krisk, the #1 champion you want to be looking at here is Jarek. Well, even if you do have Krisk, right? He's insane. Decreased attack on his A1. On his A2, an ally protect and an increased defense on all allies for 2 turns. And on his passive, Sheltering Scales, place a 15% continuous heal buff on an ally for 1 turn whenever they lose 20% of their max HP in 1 hit. That's a really amazing passive, guys. And HP in all battles by 33% as well. Jarek is definitely a champion worth considering. And then I guess I would take a look at... Jizzo is all right. He has a shield buff for 3 turns with an extra turn. So he's kind of good, but he's not really doing much to your allies, right? He has a provoke on his A3, but he's all about keeping himself alive. He's a very selfish champion, but I guess he could help you out. I think I'd rather have Broadmaw, although he is a void champion. But on his A2, he has increased crit rate and a weak version of increased speed on a 3-turn cooldown, though. And then on his A3, again, we talked about revival champions being key to your team in Faction Wars. Revives 2 random dead allies, 25% HP with the block damage buff on them on a 5-turn cooldown when booked. So Broadmaw is probably one of my favorite support champions to kind of go along with your team in Lizardmen. Ogryn. So obviously Skullcrusher is going to be, you know, really important to keep your team alive with the ally protect and has the counterattack. Then we have Maneater, same thing, right? Some people run their double man-eaters from Clan Boss in Ogre and Tribes. So this champion receives damage, has the unkillable, the block debuffs for 2 turns. So I ran 1 man-eater on my team. Siphon is incredibly good too. Fully depletes the target's turn meter and then steals it, essentially. Fully fills yours based on how much you stole. And then has an AoE, decrease attack, on all enemies, so hence the AoE, on his A1. That's really solid as well. Man-eater is a really, really good support champion. So Man-eater Grush too is really solid. I'm trying to think of who I actually ran because there's so many good options here. Grush on his A2 has an AoE, decrease attack, and a decreased crit damage for 2 turns. And then on his A3, attacks all enemies, continuous heal on all allies for 2 turns, an additional weak version of continuous heal on all allies for 1 turn if at least 1 enemy is hit with a critical hit. So a strong version and a weak version of continuous heal and an AoE attack, all on a 4-turn cooldown. Really, really solid champion with nice stats too, almost 20k and 13k respectively in HP and defense. Man, Shatterbones is good too. I can't stop, man. I can't stop in Ogren. Attacks all enemies 3 times. Has a 50% chance, 75% chance to decrease the turn meter by 30%. And he has the decreased speed. Fills the turn meter of all allies by 25% on a 5-turn on Warcry. So Shatterbones is definitely an effective champion to have too on your team. Man, I feel like I've talked about every single one of these champions. I ran Shamrock, Biggin, Man-eater, Grush, and Skullcrown on my team. All right, next up, Barbarians. Now, Barbarians is tricky. If you don't have any of the great legendary Barbarians, it's going to be a challenge. But if you play long enough, most of you will all have Scylla the Drakes eventually. So she's free to play, kind of like Vizix in a roundabout way. So she's going to be very, very helpful. She has Revive, she has a heal on her passive, she has increased speed as well on her passive, and she has a stun on her A2. Just incredibly valuable champion to have. On top of that, we have High Katoon. Again, extra speed, fills a turn meter. On the A3, she has a turn meter decreasing as well, at 75% chance on that. So, I don't know, you got some options with High Katoon with extra speed, but you're running a little bit short in the support category. You have Sky Touch Shaman. Gotta be careful of this champion, but she can be effective. It's an AoE attack on her A1, heals by 15% of the damage inflicted if this champion is less than 50% HP, boosts the champion's turn meter by 20% if she's higher than 50% HP. On her A2, removes all debuffs from all allies, 4-turn cooldown. Then has a Revive on Death buff and a Block debuffs buff on all allies for 2 turns. Immortal Skies is an insanely strong ability. I don't need to tell you guys why. Block debuffs, incredibly great, and Revive on Death, and the full cleanse. That's really, really good. And then she has all this bad stuff, basically. No, I'm just joking. She heals all allies equal to half of the lost HP on this 10% max HP on the Bloodstained Ritual passive. She also has a decreased speed and a fear on herself, 50% chance of placing that fear. So she's a good healer, she's a good cleanser, and she has good buffs to add to your team as well. Just to be careful about that passive. And then on top of that, guys, let me know who you used. I'm not really seeing anybody who jumps out at me. Vala's another champion who you could use, who's going to be very difficult to kill, but she's a very selfish champion as well. She removes all shield buffs from all enemies, then attacks all enemies in AoE. Has a, 50% chance of placing a decreased defense on all enemies for 2 turns. I guess Vala would be a very viable champion now that I forgot her A2 had a decreased defense on it, my bad. So I guess I would say that Vala is a solid, and decrease the damage received, is a solid champion to go with as well. But other than that, it's really legendary. You know, if you're lucky enough to have a Valkyrie, congratulations, you're looking good, or an Altan, right? So anyway, those are the Barbarians. And my team was, wasn't gonna say it, but basically you're looking at it here, guys, right? Yeah, I don't think I used an epic on this team, so apologies, but this is my most pay-to-win team here with Altan, Scylla the Drakes, Contra the Cyclone, Valkyrie, and Turbold. All right, next up, Sacred Order. So Sacred Order, who did I run? I didn't run any of these. I might have run Abyss, but I didn't have Rosh Card, and I didn't use Arrow. So first off, I think that Hope is one of the best champions. I didn't use her because I don't have her built out, but I think that Hope is one of the best champions, best support champions in the game, really, in Epic. category. She's a block buffs on her A1. Nice to have at a 50% rate. On the A2, increases the duration of all buffs on allies, or excuse me, of buffs on all allies by 1 turn, and then places a shield buff equal to 25% of this champion's HP on all allies for 2 turns. And then on the A3, AoE attack, attacks all enemies, and then has a 75% chance of removing all buffs. So having that buff removal with on the A2, the increased duration and the shield, very, very useful champion to have. And then has HP and faction crits by 31%. So again, very useful aura on this champion as well. I personally used Romero, who I was a huge fan of. He helped me out tremendously. Has a continuous heal buff on the ally with the lowest HP on the A1. On the A2, continuous heal on all allies for 2 turns, and then steals 1 buff from a random enemy. Why not? Why not throw that in there? And then on the A3, Divine Benefication places a shield buff on all allies equal to 25% of their max HP for 2 turns. Places an increased defense buff on this champion for 2 turns as well. So again, nice to have that shield champion on your team and the continuous heal. So just a great healer all around in Romero. This is only available if Juliana's on the same team and AoE attack based on defense. Who else helped me out? Oh, Lightsworn. Lightsworn, another great champion for you guys to consider. High base defense. On his A2, he has a decreased attack and a decreased speed debuff for 2 turns. Really, really nice to have on the brutality. And then his A3, it's simple and it's very, very good and effective. 4-turn cooldown, increased defense and revive on death buff on all allies for 2 turns. Sweet. Sign me up. So I used Lightsworn, Romero. By the way, Fenix is pretty good too. He's an attack-based champion. He hits hard on his put-down ability. On the A2, attacks all enemies. Has a 80% chance of placing a block buffs debuff for 2 turns. A block cooldown skills debuff for 1 turn if it does not place the block buffs. So a good stern partner, a good AoE, solid AoE there. And then has a decreased defense and decreased speed for 2 turns on his A3. A nice debuffer for the red boss, right? On a 4-turn cooldown. Mistress of Hymns too, a revival champion. Again, revives 2 random allies with 50% HP and places a veil on them for 1 turn. I gotta say, Sacred Order has a lot of really nice kind of healer, reviver type champions like this. Continuous heal on 2 allies with the lowest HP for 2 turns if the attack is critical on Song of Triumph. And then it has a heal the ally with the lowest HP by 15% of the damage inflicted on bolstering below her A1. So defense in all battles by 25% as well. Nice aura on her. So we went over quite a few champions here, guys. Aothar's not going to help out. Yeah, I think that's pretty much my faves there. So again, my team was actually very support heavy. I ran Draconis, an epic champion, a rare champion, excuse me. I ran Draconis, and I ran Romero, Lightsworn, and then who did I use? Who did I use after that? I ran Abyss, and I'm trying to think of who I ran last. I guess you guys don't really care, right? Draconis? All right, I haven't edited this video yet, and I'm not going to go ahead and I think, you know what, guys? I ran Cardinal, my bad. So she has another increased defense and a heal on the A2, and then she has the revival on Redemption. So that was my last champion. So very support heavy with Cardinal, Lightsworn, Draconis, Romero, and Abyss being the only damage dealer on the team. High Elves next. I went Shiramani, Lysandra, and Arbiter. And there's a lot of good choices here too on epics, right? I'm not sure if I even ran Royal Guard, but he could be your nuker on your team. Obviously, I ran Tyrell as well. And I think I ran Thenasil. So I ran Tyrell, Thenasil, and those legendaries. But really, you could get by with Reliquary Tender and Apothecary also on your team, even in stage 21, even the 3-star, providing you have the rest kind of supporting cast alongside them, right? So Tyrell, great for decreased defense, obviously decreased attack, and then having the fully depleted turn meter, or excuse me, the 50% depleted turn meter being a defense-based champion is really solid to have on your team as well. Thenasil is amazing on Oakskinned. Increased defense, strong version, 2 turns, 3-turn cooldown, plus the 25% heal based on his max HP. I put him in a shield set as well. And then we have Vergis is a really solid champion now. Has a reflect damage on a random ally for 2 turns on his A1. On his A2, he's doing all this stuff. Look at all these buffs, man. Wow. Continuous heal, increased speed, reflect damage buff on a target ally for 3 turns, and then has an ally protect buff on all allies except this champion for 2 turns, and then has a strong version of increased defense on himself for 2 turns. Man, Aegis is an insane ability on a 3-turn cooldown. What? And then, as if it couldn't get any better than that, on a 1-turn passive, when booked, he has a shield buff on this champion equal to 10% of their max HP for 2 turns whenever this champion loses 10% or more of their max HP from a single hit. And then active effect, places a 15% continuous heal buff on this champion for 2 turns every time their HP drops below 50%. Wow, dude. What a sick champion in Vergis. And then, you guys, even more options, right? Jingle Hunter is not a bad champion to have. He is an attack-based champion, but he has a freeze at 100% on a single target on his A2. And then he has attacks all enemies, decreases turn meter by 20% if his attack is critical, fills his champion's turn meter by 10% if his attack is critical as well. So, you know, I don't think you're going to be... Not that you can't win his 3-star 21 with Jingle Hunter, but I do think there's probably better options for you guys. Battle Sage is incredible as well. Has a removal of all debuffs on all allies, and this buff cannot be removed. The increased attack, and then she has a Revive on Death buff on a target for 3 turns. The ally will instantly revive. That's what Revive on Death means, huh? So Battle Sage is very awesome as well. And again, guys, if I'm missing any champions who you used, be sure to let me know. Last but not least, it's the Bannerlords, guys. Obviously, Stag Knight is a beast. He's a boss. He has the decreased defense and the decreased attack on a 2-turn cooldown. And then he has the decreased speed on the A1 with the passive increasing accuracy for every debuff or every debuff that was resisted. Let's see. Who else did I use? Stag Knight. I used Lord Champfort. I used Black Knight. And then I used Wardcaster. So Wardcaster, Stag Knight, and then 3 legendaries. Richtoff. I didn't use Killian. Champfort, and yeah, Stag. Anyway, a couple champions that deserve a mention. Seneschal on his A1 has a Leech based on defense and attack. On his A2, Perfect Veil and a continuous heal buff on all allies for 2 turns. Really solid ability and misdirect on a 2-turn cooldown, right when booked. Counterattack buff on this champion for 2 turns. 50% chance of placing a provoke debuff on all enemies, and that can be booked all the way up to 100% provoke on a 4-turn cooldown with the counterattack that leads into him landing more leeches that helps heal your team up a little bit as well. So Seneschal, definitely a champion that deserves a look at. I haven't seen anybody say a bunch of good things about Masked Fearmonger, the new champion, yet, but he could be a fun champion to kind of mess around with. But for me, Warcaster was really the difference maker here. Has a chance of stealing buffs on his A1. On his A2, attacks all enemies. Has a 75% chance of placing a block buffs debuff for 2 turns. So block buffs on a 3-turn cooldown lasting 2 turns is definitely a difference maker in Faction Wars. Anything that's challenging, that you're going against a bunch of Valkyries or anybody, Man-Eaters, whatever, right? It's going to be very helpful to have that. And then on his A3, has a block damage buff on all allies for 1 turn on a 4-turn cooldown. So every 4 turns, it gives me a second to breathe, heal up the rest of my champions, get our kind of, get their team together and gathered. So it's nice to have that invincible aura ability as well on your team. So I definitely use Warcaster. And yeah, anybody I'm forgetting here? Lordly Legionary is trash. If I had to choose one champion, though, I would go after Seneschal. I would choose Seneschal over, I think, Warcaster. Having already made the decision to do Warcaster over Seneschal, I think I regret that. But, we got the job done anyway. And just a really good bunch of support champions here in terms of epic. And Knight Errant always deserves kind of a nod to as just being a huge damage dealer if you're looking for extra damage on your squad as well. Guys, we're going to end the video right before 40 minutes. We made it, or you made it. I barely made it. You guys definitely made it. I hope this video has helped you out just a little bit, especially kind of sharing my teams and kind of the strategies and artifact sets that I put on some of these champions and kind of giving a little bit of love to champions who I think are really good support champions in the game. So guys, thank you so much for watching, and as always, take care, guys.